And how else to end with none other than Vinod Khosla. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, Doug MacMillan from the Wall Street Journal in a fireside chat with Mr. Vinod.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's a great honor to be sitting here and joined by Vinod Khosla, who is an excellent interview. I've interviewed him before. He's the founding CEO of Sun Microsystems, and more recently, he's known for founding Khosla Ventures, which is a pioneering investor in clean technology, and a lot of companies that people in this room have heard of: Arista Networks, Indiegogo, Instacart, Jawbone, Zenefits, and a handful of Israeli companies: Zebra Medical, Centipede, Billguard, and Consumer Physics, which is the company that we just heard about. Why don't we start there? What intrigued you about Consumer Physics, and why did you decide to invest in this company?
One of the things I liked about Consumer Physics is what I like about all startups, and is particularly relevant to the Israeli environment, which is there's serious science and scientists involved. I personally enjoy the serious science, the hard problems, a lot. So if you look at Centipede, they're trying to solve mobile processing power. It's not an area too many people take on because it's hard to do well.
Can you explain what Centipede is for maybe people?
So Centipede takes processes and reduces their power consumption using software-only techniques, or mostly software techniques. And in a market where all the big guys are competing for power mobile processors, it's hard to get in. It's a scary area. But if you do a good enough job, the advantage is compelling. Then it becomes an interesting company. Zebra, on the other hand, is trying to do essentially automated radiology, whether it's X-rays or MRI or CT scans. What a radiologist does in reading an image, Zebra should be able to do. It's a hard machine learning problem. So those are representative of the kinds of problems we like. Consumer Physics, of course, took real rocket science to do this simple demo well, to reduce what is a big, huge precision instrument into something that's so small and so cheap. So that's the profile of startups we like, and actually there's a lot of those in Israel because there's great science and scientists and great technical expertise.
That's right. We were just talking, there's greater risk investing in hard science companies. Do you think that this is why you have something of a competitive advantage over some of the other investors and who tend to focus more on the Snapchats of the consumer technology investments?
I think we, more than most venture firms, like serious technology. It takes longer, your failure rates are higher, but when you finish, you have something much more proprietary and a much bigger technical advantage. We tend to like that profile. It also scares too many other people. We tend to be a fairly technical firm, so we can go into the details ourselves, and that scares other firms. So it's a good match for us. It's a competitive area where we do pretty well, and we take on lots and lots of very hard problems.
My publication reported on one hard science company, Theranos, over the past few months. Have some of the revelations around that company been a wake-up call to investors in this area, and have you started to look kind of more closely at possible investments or companies in your own portfolio about representing what you can learn from hard science and whether it's a good investment or not?
Look, there's always optimism in entrepreneurs. All of you who are entrepreneurs probably know that. You have to be very careful. You still make mistakes. I can tell you, we made mistakes because we believed in entrepreneur. Theranos is trying to tackle a serious problem. I think the problem there wasn't so much they missed their targets. I think the level of openness, to me, has been a much bigger problem. Transparency is pretty important. There was just a study published this week by Mount Sinai on their tests. And 15 of the 22 tests Mount Sinai tested blindly didn't work out very well. So it just was our problem. Which is okay if you know they're not working well and announce they're not working well. Then people give you time to go fix those problems. But it happens. I can't blame the investors in Theranos for that at all.
You've been known as a kind of a champion for entrepreneurs that you invest in. But you've also said that many VCs don't add value in this industry. Can you explain kind of what a VC can do to add value?
So if you look at a startup, any serious startup, it's hard to be an entrepreneur. There's lots and lots of ways to fail and a few ways to succeed. And only entrepreneurs realize how scary it is, how difficult it is, how emotional it is. So the job of an entrepreneur is start with this really hard problem, things that normal people would not attempt. Somebody at an established optics company wouldn't attempt what consumer physics did. They would say it's not possible. So you're starting with a hard problem, and I like to say not all hard things are valuable, but most valuable things are hard. And that necessarily means you're starting with a high risk of failure. And your job as an entrepreneur is to eliminate risks one at a time. Thinking about it the right way, deciding who you need on your team to solve the risks. You want to build a team that matches the risks of the problems you're trying to solve. What are the stages? When do you increase your burn rate? When don't you? Who you pay a lot to get on board and who you don't. Those are all judgment calls that are hard for a first-time entrepreneur, but if you've sort of screwed up enough times, like we have, you sort of learn from your mistakes a lot.
So you bring your wisdom and you bring your knowledge of these
I like to say I bring the largest repertoire of mistakes of anybody in the world in building startups.
And how is your job changing in modern investing kind of era? We're seeing a lot of down rounds. We're seeing kind of a general slowdown in funding. We're seeing a general IPO drought, kind of the top end of the market. How are you kind of thinking about the current climate, and how is it affecting you and your job?
Well, my view is the reality of entrepreneurship is building things and getting them to market and selling stuff. And then there's this perceptual world of Wall Street, where people dick around with mental models that I actually think bear very little reality in them. They look at each other and say, if you're being optimistic, then I'll be optimistic, and it's sort of this herd instinct. For an entrepreneur, that's not reality, and valuations aren't reality. They're paper things. But you have to manage it because it's your source of funding. So you have to be smart and look at it as a problem to be solved and managed. Investors bounce between fear and greed all the time. When the 2001 crisis happened, somebody asked me this question, what do you think? And I said, 10 years from now, nobody will care. And my forecast, and people were looking at where the internet was going, for the internet is no different. You can look at stock markets and you can see the crash, the dot-com crash and the telecom crash. You can look at internet traffic, and I challenge you to tell me when those crashes happened. That means real life kept going on, while this perception of overhype or over-pessimism affected reporting, definitely for the Wall Street Journal, definitely for Wall Street. It's just a problem I think entrepreneurs need to manage. I think we can help manage that, like when to be overly cautious, when to manage burn. I'll call Dror and say, Dror, you need to manage burn now because there's this uncertain environment.
Are there too many companies getting funded? Another venture capitalist, Chamath, over at Social Capital, was quoted this week in Vanity Fair as saying, most of the startups out there are mostly crap.
Well, it's sort of like saying half of advertising is crap. The problem is you don't know which half.
Which half, yeah. That's your job.
Our job is to try and make intelligent guesses and take risks. When there's too much money in venture capital, the number of, so if every investor decides to invest in venture capital, the number of great opportunities doesn't change. Then they start funding crappy things. So in times of optimism, when investors get money easily and they pass on money to companies easily, crap does get funded. In sparse environments, when people are more cautious, the reverse happens. Even some good startups don't get funded. So these are just parts. So I say entrepreneurship is a roller coaster where the highs are high and the lows are low. And entrepreneurs just need to manage through it.
What do you tell your entrepreneurs? What kind of advice have you been giving them in recent months?
So my general advice is the following. You want to follow your business plan with the caveat that you have to get funded. I like to say I'm completely ignorant about what the market will be like for funding new companies or funding an existing company in 6 or 9 months. People who claim it's a bubble and people who claim it's not, I can give you one of each. Just this weekend, I saw a bunch of tweets from Mark Andreessen saying there's no bubble. And then I can tell you people who think there's too much of hype and too much bubble. I like to say I don't know, but make sure at any time you can hit the brakes hard and make sure you survive if funding dries up. If you're a Formula One racer, and if anybody's done Formula One racing, there's only 2 things you do. You brake as hard as possible at the last minute to make sure you don't skid out at the turn, and then you accelerate as hard as possible. So agility is what I tell people. I always say have a contingency plan to make sure you can cut your burn to very low. So plan to be agile in how fast you change, and then be vigilant.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see the results of some startups getting this religion in recent weeks. Even there have been layoffs at a lot of companies, including your investments, Zenefits and Instacart. Is that kind of one strategy, just kind of trim the fat or focus on how to become more efficient?
You know, every company is a little bit different. The opportunity set is different. So sometimes I'm telling a company they're not spending enough money and they need to accelerate. And that's probably about 1/3 of my conversations in the last 3 months. Another third is you're spending too much money and hit the brakes and plan for no more funding and then see how you get to break even if it's a little slower. And then a third are you're doing just fine, just be vigilant. Here's the thing about an environment like today. So if you're running a business and you think funding will be tight, you think it's bad for you, but it's not, because your new potential competitors will not get funded at all. You can take longer to get to the same point. It makes logical sense because now you don't have competitors being funded copying you, so you can take your time and do it with much less risk and much less funding. So there's a good side and a bad side to all this if you manage it well. The key is to manage all the risks, and which risk you currently have changes from time to time. Look, I talked about risk and managing risk down for an entrepreneur. What an entrepreneur has to do is essentially manage all his risks. If funding is easy, you raise lots of money, put more people, and build a more feature-rich product. Now you've taken a little bit of financial risk, but reduced your product market fit risk because you built a much more comprehensive product. If funding is tight, you build a bare bones product, you're taking marketing risk, but not taking financial risk. This is a risk management job.
Who do you work with who's really good at that?
There's lots of entrepreneurs that are very good at that. Instacart has a very good business.
And as a Porva, the CEO, they're good at managing risk?
Yeah, he's done a very good job. He's a very young guy. He's done a very good job of managing risk and yet being strategic.
Why do you say that? Is there an example?
I couldn't go into the details.
That's okay. What excites you about your job? What do you enjoy doing the most?
Look, I'm actually not a fan of investing. I don't think of myself as an investor. I love cool technologies like consumer physics. I love helping bring technologies to market, mentoring an entrepreneur to cause some really interesting change to happen. And as long as I can keep doing it and learning in the process, because when I talk to Dror about the physics behind the CO's device, I learn something. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really a techie nerd, and I indulge my hobby by pretending to be an investor.
Uh-huh. Someone on your team told me to ask you about gene pool engineering. What's gene pool engineering?
So I talked about risk. People, when any entrepreneur here, when they build a team, they call people they know and get them on the team. It's usually the wrong way to build a team. You engineer the gene pool of a founding team to match the risk. So, simple process. I tell people, tell me your biggest first 5 risks in the next 2-3 years. If you have those risks, I say, which company has faced those risks? So take risk number 1, say it's this company A, say, who are the 3 people who worked on that risk? Now, if you hire one of those 3 people, you will have reduced the probability of running into this risk. Mm-hmm. That's engineering the gene pool of the company for the specific risks your business plan has. Now, most companies pivot, so the risks keep changing, so you have to be agile about it. But you can make so much of a difference in engineering the gene pool of a company correctly and dramatically increase the chance that among the hundreds of companies getting funded, you're one that's successful at the other.
Is there a company that might illustrate this for us? Stands out for you?
It would probably take too much time to go through the process, but look, I walked through this with every single company.
Okay. How about one bold prediction about what's going to happen with kind of tech startup investing over the next 2 or 3 years?
I think things go through cycles. A lot of people decide they don't want to do the really hard stuff when real physics is involved. You know, one of our other founders at Sora LEDs won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2014. It was sort of cool to go to the Nobel Prize ceremony. Yeah. I really enjoyed that. Nobody wants to do, and that was a company that had a hard time getting funding with a Nobel Prize winning sort of breakthrough in physics.
Because nobody knew if it would work.
Well, but people just don't like real risk. I think those will become more in fashion over time and easier to do, which is good news for really techie founders.
Is that good news for Khosla Ventures?
Absolutely. So whether it's hardware like COs and consumer physics or the latest machine learning startup, Zebra is about machine learning. Huge opportunities in that area. Really takes more than software people, it takes mathematicians. Mm-hmm. Those areas are going to be in big demand. Frankly, those people were ignored in the past, and there'll be huge sources of great entrepreneurial opportunities.
That bodes well for the Israeli startup community as well.
Yeah, it does. One word of caution, though. One of the things I found is Israeli companies aren't as diverse in the gene pool they hire. And I always keep pushing, get a much more diverse gene pool. Mm-hmm. Again, it's this idea of hiring your friends or people locally or people you know.
What do you mean by diversity? Diversity of experience?
Diversity of experience, diversity in markets, mm-hmm. diversity in what kinds of companies they've been in. You know, when you're a techie founder, what you need the most is non-techie stuff, not more techie stuff. Mm-hmm. Right? It's easier for you to recognize who's a great techie and hire them. Much harder for you to say, who can create a consumer experience? So experience design is something companies generally, Israeli companies don't do as well at. And then you can turn a great opportunity into a good opportunity by missing some key elements. So thinking through that is a really important thing for all startups to do.
Great. Well, thanks for your time, Vinod. Let's have a hand for Vinod Khosla.
Great.